I was reading your report, The Cost of Budget Uncertainty, Analyzing the Impact of Late Appropriations, for the IBM Center. I noticed the terrific job you did setting the historical context. But it doesn't stop there. You also outline very practical, actionable recommendations. And I'd like to explore each of them. Would you highlight the key recommendations you offer in your Center report? What are some of the key benefits of pursuing these recommendations? And more particularly, are there any significant obstacles to implementing them?
Well, I think it was interesting when I got to the point where I was working on recommendations. I almost kind of left this out, but I thought I could leave it out or I could put it in bold, and I ended up putting it in bold, and that was a recommendation that the Congress should just fulfill its constitutional responsibility and routinely enact appropriations before the beginning of the fiscal year. I mentioned to one of the people in a federal agency that I had interviewed that I had put this in the report, and that person's response was, "Did it make you feel better?" And that was essentially to say, well, okay, but now what? So the now what is, okay, well, let's say the Congress isn't going to do that. What are the things that we could think about that might actually make the situation better? There are a few of those. One of them is, I think that more funding should be made available on a multi-year basis, or what's called a no-year basis. Agencies that have less money that is available only for 1 year have an easier time navigating this process. And so to think about, are there cases where we can actually allow agencies to spend money over a longer period of time, as is true for the Department of Defense, for example. They have a lot of money that can be spent over a longer period of time. I think the reason that tends not to happen is because the Congress is trying to keep more control. And so there is this sort of trade-off between the Congress having control and agencies having more flexibility. But I think that the Congress should consider giving up some of that control, since the problems that are being caused by federal agencies are largely a result of congressional inaction to begin with. A second recommendation I had, which is one that strikes some people as sort of odd, is that the Congress should simply stop engaging in CRs at all. That is, the Congress should be prohibited from enacting continuing resolutions. Now, the reason that's considered odd by some people is that it actually flies in the face of what is more frequently a recommendation, which is that you should have what are called automatic continuing resolutions. That is, the Congress should not have to actually take action in order to pass a continuing resolution. If there isn't an appropriation, you should just have a continuing resolution. I think that just makes it easier to have a continuing resolution, and I'd actually like to make it harder. So I think if you prohibited continuing resolutions, what would end up happening is that you would have two choices. You either shut the government down or you pass a budget. And if that's the choice, I think it would make more transparent the effect of inaction, which is actually what I want to do. So that was my second recommendation. Third, I think that if there are CRs, they should not just be funding at the prior year's level, but they should permit inflationary increases. And the reason for that is because, often what happens is, because inflation is going to occur, a CR actually does not permit agencies to keep doing all the things they're already doing. It actually requires them to cut back on some things they're already doing in order to finance inflation, which I think is, runs counter to what should be the, at least, in principle, the spirit of what a CR should be. Fourth, I think that the Congress should get out of the business, or at least reduce the amount that they micromanage the budget execution process. In many cases now, if the agency gets an appropriation, the Congress wants to see a spending plan from that agency and implicitly to approve that spending plan prior to the agency being able to actually carry out the budget. Well, that's fine if you did the budget on time. But if you're doing it 6 months into the fiscal year, all that does is further compress the time period in which the budget needs to be executed. And again, if the Congress isn't going to do its work on time, I think they should sort of not get involved in that kind of micromanagement. And then the final thing I would say is that if they're going to be CRs, they should be limited to a small number, 1 or 2 per year, that don't extend past the end of the calendar year. That we can sort of put up with, the kind of 3-month delay in the appropriations process. It's not optimal, but it's not awful. But once you get into 6 months into the fiscal year, and once you get into 5 or 10 separate CRs, that's where the costs begin to really go up.